Well, there's more bad news for Google. The company is facing yet another scandal, this time dealing with the EU. Investigative journalist and RT contributor Wayne Madsen is here to talk to me about what's happening to this incredibly popular search engine. So, Wayne, Google is the biggest news provider all over the world, but it seems like now it's making the headlines itself. Why all of a sudden the backlash against Google?
Well, it may have become too popular around the world. The latest problems for Google arises from three companies in Europe charging Google with unfair competition. They are basically these three companies. I would note, though, some of them actually have some links to Microsoft, which is no great friend of Google. But in the greater scheme of things, whether it's Google or Microsoft, I think the big looming issue is the issue of government control over the internet. Whether it's here in the United States, we know that Google has a special relationship now, a formal relationship with the National Security Agency, the top signals intelligence agency, probably the largest in the world. And Microsoft also has similar deals with the National Security Agency. And I think that's where really this whole issue is going to play out, government control.
And we also know that the CEO of Google publicly campaigned for President Obama, and he's been invited to the White House to talk about policy with President Obama. Do you think that might help Google stay out of trouble?
Well, it might in some sense. Of course, Secretary of State Clinton really railed against the Chinese government when when Google threatened to pull out of China over the issue of censorship. But it's not just in China. We have issues of censorship looming right here in the United States. I would note that the head of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, Dr. Cass Sunstein from Harvard, has basically written several tracts and books calling for restrictions on content on the internet. He talks about conspiracy theory websites and how these should be infiltrated and possibly even shut down. So it's not just China, it's not just the European Union. There was an incident also in Italy where three Google executives were convicted for posting something on Google Video, which showed basically abuse of a young person with Down syndrome. But these issues are taking place all around the world, certainly not just in Europe and China, but we have some issues here in the United States as well.
And another story that was making headlines was supposedly, or allegedly, I guess you could say, Google's CEO had threatened one of his mistresses to take down a blog that was online. Do you think that Google has become such a powerful company that it kind of feels like there's no consequences when they do these, ethical and legal violations, I guess you could say?
Well, I think there's a real problem with Google and censorship right now because many people who operate websites who I'm in contact with are saying, hey, where's my content? It doesn't show up when I do a Google search. So, of course, there are alternative search engines, but again, people's reflexive attitude is if I need to find something, I go to Google. And maybe that'll change because Google is getting such bad press these days. Maybe alternative search engines are the way to go.
And what's likely to happen with this EU investigation? Do you think Google will actually be punished over it?
Well, I think we're going to see this as an issue of the trade negotiations between the United States and European Union. It'll be caught up with a bunch of lawyers. We'll get together, and I'm sure Google might have to pay a fine, but I don't think the long-term prospects for Google will be anything that would suggest that the company would get into deep trouble, especially financial or regulatory trouble.
Well, RT contributor and investigative journalist Wayne Madsen, more bad news for Google.